The airport terminal was a sea of gray. Gray carpets, gray faces, and the cold, gray light of a rainy Tuesday. But at gate 47B, the atmosphere was turning a violent shade of red. Serena Wright adjusted her blazer, her fingers grazing the gold lead agent pin on her lapel. She liked the pin. It felt like a badge of office, a license to decide who moved forward and who stayed behind. When Margaret Collins approached the desk, Serena didn't see a human being. She saw a problem. She saw a woman whose skin was too dark for Serena's comfort and whose floral dress looked like it had been bought at a discount bin 10 years ago. "I'm sorry, but you're a liability," Serena said, her voice dripping with a fake, sugary concern that was more insulting than a scream. "You smell like a hospital, and you look like you're about to collapse. This airline isn't an ambulance." Margaret's hand flew to her chest. Beneath the floral fabric was a fresh, jagged scar from a triple bypass surgery. "I have my papers," Margaret whispered, her voice cracking. "My doctor cleared me. My mother is 78. Tomorrow is my birthday. If I don't get on this plane, I'll never see her." "Next," Serena barked, looking right over Margaret's head. This is the moment the underestimated hook takes hold of the audience's throat. It is the classic setup. An absolute villain abusing a position of minor power to crush someone who cannot fight back. It creates a vacuum of justice that the viewer feels in their chest. They are thinking, "Someone, please, do something." Enter the Washington triplets. They were sitting in the front row of the boarding area, 3 8-year-old girls in sharp, tailored blazers. To Serena, they were just kids, nuisances to be ignored. She assumed they were waiting for a nanny or a distracted parent. She had no idea she was looking at the most powerful trio of orphans in the financial world. Ariel Washington stood up first. At 4 feet tall, she was half Serena's height, but when she walked to the counter, the air in the terminal seemed to chill. "You're violating the Air Carrier Access Act," Ariel said. No whining, no childish tone. "Just cold surgical facts," Serena laughed. A sharp, ugly sound. "Go back to your crayons, sweetie. Adults are talking." "Actually," Ariel replied, sliding a black, matte metal card onto the counter. "This conversation just got very expensive for you. My sisters and I just bought this flight. Every seat. The manifest is being updated as we speak." This is where the hook pays off. The underestimated hero reveals their true strength. The audience, who was just mourning for Margaret, now feels a surge of adrenaline. The power dynamic hasn't just shifted, it has been inverted. While Serena's jaw dropped, Belle Washington held up a tablet. "I've just sent your employee file to the CEO's personal email. 14 complaints for discrimination. Serena? And you're still here? That's a corporate culture problem. One we intend to fix once our foundation buys out your regional contract." The underestimated hook works because it mirrors the secret fantasy of every person who has ever been bullied or ignored. It's the belief that somewhere, someone is watching, and that justice isn't just possible, it's inevitable. As Margaret was led onto the plane by a personal medical escort hired by the girls, Serena stood frozen, her lead agent pin reflecting the light of 100 phone cameras. She had thought she was the one with the power, never realizing that the smallest people in the room were the ones who owned the floor she was standing on. The fluorescent lights of Gate 47B flickered, casting a sickly glow over a scene of quiet devastation. Margaret Collins sat on a plastic terminal chair, her head in her hands. She had survived a triple bypass surgery only to be told her existence was a safety risk by a gate agent who hadn't even looked her in the eye. Serena Wright, the agent, stood behind her podium like a queen on a throne of bureaucracy. She adjusted her headset, her eyes scanning the crowd with a predator's precision, looking for the next person to manage. To Serena, power was a zero-sum game. For her to feel important, someone else had to be made small. And who was smaller than a lone, recovering woman with no one to defend her? She didn't notice the three girls watching her. Ariel, Belle, and Camille Washington sat in the front row. To any casual observer, they were just three children in exceptionally well-made blazers, perhaps the daughters of a diplomat or a tech mogul. They were quiet, their eyes moving in sync as they analyzed the interaction at the counter. They represented the ultimate contrast of power, the physical stature of a child versus the financial weight of a nation. "She's crying," Camille whispered, her voice tight with empathy. "The agent said she smells like a hospital. That's a lie. She smells like peppermint and fear." Ariel nodded, her face a mask of stone. "Belle, status? I've accessed the airline's live manifest," Belle said, her fingers dancing across a sleek, custom-built tablet. "Flight 2847 is at 70% capacity. The gate agent is blocking Mrs. Collins because of a personal bias, not a safety protocol. Total cost to buy every remaining seat and the gate contract itself? Negligible." Ariel stood up. The contrast was startling. She was barely 4 feet tall, her ponytail bouncing as she walked toward the podium. Serena didn't even look up until Ariel's hand, small, delicate, and steady, slid a matte black American Express Centurion card across the counter. "I need you to process Mrs. Collins's boarding pass immediately," Ariel said. Serena let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "Sweetie, is this a toy? Where is your mother? You can't play games at the gate." "It isn't a game," Ariel replied, her voice dropping an octave, carrying a resonance that silenced the surrounding passengers. "That card has no preset spending limit. My sisters and I have just purchased every vacant seat on this aircraft. We are now technically the majority stakeholders of this specific flight's revenue." The terminal went dead silent. The payback moment, the pivot that drives viral engagement, was happening in real time. The visual of a child's small hand resting on a card that could buy a fleet of private jets created a friction so intense it felt electric. Serena's face turned a mottled purple. That's impossible. You're 8 years old, and you're unemployed," Belle added, walking up with her tablet. "Our legal team just contacted your corporate headquarters. We've offered a $50 million culture grant to the airline, contingent on the immediate removal of staff with multiple civil rights complaints. You have 14, Serena. Your uncle in regional management can't hide you from a $1 trillion audit." This was the extreme contrast of power in action. Serena had used her tiny bit of authority to crush a woman's spirit. The triplets used their mountain of resources to move the earth beneath Serena's feet. As a team of high-end medical escorts, suddenly appearing from the VIP lounge, surrounded Margaret to help her board, the crowd began to cheer. The image was iconic. The vulnerable woman being lifted up, the bully being silenced, and 3 small girls standing tall, proving that in the world of the Washington triplets, the smallest voices carry the loudest checks. The air at Gate 47B was thick with attention that had nothing to do with flight delays and everything to do with a quiet, systemic cruelty. Margaret Collins stood at the counter, her frame slight and her skin a deep, weary bronze. She wasn't just a passenger, she was a survivor. But to Serena Wright, she was a stereotype. "I told you, ma'am," Serena said, her voice loud enough to draw stares from the nearby terminal. "We have to be careful with certain passengers. You look unwell, and quite frankly, you're making the other guests uncomfortable. We can't have you causing a scene midair." Margaret flinched as if she'd been struck. "I'm not a scene. I'm a mother. I'm a human being." This is where the story taps into the raw nerves of the American audience. It isn't just about a missed flight. It's about the moral stakes of racial bias and medical discrimination, real-world issues that millions of viewers see in their news feeds every day. The urgency of the story comes from the recognition of an injustice that feels all too familiar. Watching from the sidelines, the Washington triplets, Ariel, Belle, and Camille, didn't see a medical liability. They saw the same look their own grandmother used to describe when she spoke of the Jim Crow era. The look of a person being told their presence is an inconvenience. "She's doing it because Margaret is black and poor," Camille whispered, her eyes shining with a protective fire. "She thinks no one will care if she breaks a heart that doesn't look like hers." Ariel straightened her blazer. "Then we'll make sure she never forgets who she broke it in front of." When Ariel stepped forward, the moral stakes shifted from a private tragedy to a public reckoning. "You're talking about safety," Ariel said to Serena, "but you're practicing prejudice. You're using company policy as a mask for your own bias." Serena rolled her eyes. "You don't know anything about the real world, kid. I know that the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection." Belle chimed in, holding up her tablet. "And I know that your airline receives federal funding, which makes this a Title VI violation. You're not just being mean, Serena. You're being illegal." The audience watching this video doesn't just see a payback moment. They see a victory for social justice. In a world where the little guy often feels crushed by corporate systems and ingrained bias, seeing three young girls use their trillionaire status to enforce a moral code is incredibly cathartic. It resonates because it addresses a deep-seated American value, the idea that everyone, regardless of their health or their heritage, deserves to be treated with dignity. "We aren't just here to buy a seat," Ariel said, her voice echoing through the gate as she placed her black card on the counter. "We're here to buy a change in policy. If your airline wants our foundation's investment, it starts with an apology to Mrs. Collins in front of every person you just humiliated her in front of." The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of the moment. Serena looked around and realized the other guests weren't uncomfortable with Margaret. They were disgusted by her. As Margaret finally walked down the jet bridge, not as a liability, but as a VIP guest of the Washington family, the moral victory was complete. The story works because it doesn't just entertain, it challenges. It forces the viewer to confront the reality of bias and offers a glimmer of hope. That when power meets purpose, justice isn't just a dream, it's a reality. At Gate 47B, the air didn't just feel heavy, it felt monitored. In 2026, the silence of a terminal is never truly silent. It is the hum of 1,000 invisible witnesses. As Serena Wright continued her dismissal of Margaret Collins, she failed to realize she wasn't just standing in an airport. She was standing in a digital courtroom. The high-stakes documentation began with a single, steady hand. Dr. Sarah Williams, a pediatric surgeon with 2.3 million TikTok followers, didn't yell. She didn't intervene physically. She simply adjusted her phone's stabilizer, her lens capturing every flicker of disdain on Serena's face. This is the modern reality of accountability, the viral threat. To a digital audience, the satisfying payback isn't just a check. It's the realization that in the age of the smartphone, there are no more private cruelties. "I'm recording this live," Dr. Williams said, her voice cool and clinical. 12,000 people are watching you. Tell a post-op heart patient that she smells like a hospital. Do you have a statement for them? Or should I just let the feed run? Serena's eyes darted to the phone. For the first time, her mask of authority cracked. In the past, a gate agent could bully a passenger and rely on a he said, she said HR report. But in the world of the Washington triplets, documentation is the ultimate weapon. Belle Washington stepped forward, her tablet glowing with a live feed of Serena's own employment history, cross-referenced with public legal filings. "You're worried about that phone?" Belle asked. "You should be worried about the man standing behind you." She gestured to Robert Chin, a senior partner at a top civil rights firm who had already hit record on his smart glasses. "I'm not just a witness," Chin said, his voice carrying the weight of a dozen successful federal lawsuits. "I am a record of evidence. Everything you've said in the last 5 minutes constitutes a prima facie case of discriminatory intent. The story reaches its peak of satisfaction here because the consequences feel real. It's not just a mean person getting yelled at. It's a career being dismantled by the very technology we carry in our pockets. The presence of legal tech influencers and retired federal judges like William Porter adds a layer of intellectual weight to the drama. When Judge Porter stepped into the frame, he wasn't just an old man. He was a living seal of legal authority. "I've spent 40 years on the bench," Porter said, looking directly into Dr. Williams' camera. "And I can tell the millions watching this. What we are seeing is a textbook violation of the ADA. This isn't a debate. It's a liability." The triplets didn't just use their money. They used the environment of 2026. They knew that in a world of infinite scroll and instant uploads, a single minute of documented bias is worth more than a decade of corporate apologies. As Serena's supervisor arrived, she wasn't met with a complaint. She was met with a digital dossier. The documentation hook is what keeps the audience glued to the screen. They want to see the moment the bully realizes the record button is red. They want to see the Trillionaire triplets turn a private injustice into a global headline. As Margaret was escorted onto the plane, she wasn't just a passenger anymore. She was a symbol, protected by a digital shield that no biased agent could ever hope to pierce. The secret to a story that keeps a viewer's thumb from scrolling away is the curiosity gap, the art of opening a loop in the audience's mind and refusing to close it until the final second. At Gate 47B, this gap didn't just open. It widened into a chasm. It started with a simple, relatable frustration, a denied boarding pass. Margaret Collins, weak and recovering, was being told no. To the viewer, this is the first hook. Will she get on the plane? But just as the audience begins to settle into that question, the Washington triplets move the goalposts. "We aren't just getting her on the plane," Ariel Washington said, her voice a calm contrast to the airport's chaos. "We're changing who owns the seats." Suddenly, the stakes jumped from a travel dispute to a financial takeover. The curiosity gap shifted. Can an 8-year-old actually buy a flight? The audience stays to see the black card hit the counter. They stay to hear the confirmation of the $127,350 transaction. But the triplets knew that a payback moment is only satisfying if it leads to a deeper revelation. Just as Serena Wright began to stammer an apology, realizing her job was on the line, Belle Washington clicked a button on her tablet. The buying the plane plot point was just a distraction for the real move, the exposure of a corporate cover-up. "You think this is about you, Serena?" Belle asked, her eyes never leaving the screen. "You're just a symptom. We've been monitoring this airline's internal communications for the last 20 minutes. Your uncle, the regional manager, didn't just ignore the previous 14 complaints against you. He deleted them from the federal reporting database." The stakes hit the ceiling. This was no longer a story about a mean gate agent. It was a story about a multi-billion-dollar corporation protecting a predator. The curiosity gap widened again. How deep does the corruption go? And what will these children do to the man behind the curtain? The tension was a physical weight. The viewers weren't just watching a video anymore. They were witnesses to a dismantling. Every time the story felt like it might reach a resolution, the boring part, where people shake hands and walk away, the triplets threw another log on the fire. They didn't just want Serena fired. They wanted the system rewired. My legal team is already filing an injunction against your uncle, Ariel said, her voice echoing through the silent terminal. And since we now hold the majority of the unsold revenue for this route, we're calling an emergency audit of the airline's civil rights compliance. Either you reform the entire boarding protocol for medical patients by sunset, or we withdraw our foundation's water filtration patents from your parent company's global offices. The final loop was the most emotional one. What about Margaret? Amidst the billion-dollar chess moves, the story returned to the woman in the floral dress. The curiosity gap finally closed when Camille knelt by Margaret and whispered, "The plane is empty, Mrs. Collins. It's yours. All 180 seats. You can fly to your mother in total peace." By constantly raising the stakes, from a ticket, to a plane, to a corporate conspiracy, to a global patent threat, the story ensured that there was never a moment for the viewer to catch their breath. They were forced to watch until the very end, not just to see the bully lose, but to see the world change. The resolution wasn't just a happy ending. It was a total reconstruction of justice, delivered by the three smallest people in the room.